Hi everybody. Welcome to our channel, The Scary Tales. Our scary and horror stories are designed to send chills down your spine. Enjoy the spine-tingling stories thrill. Here's your horror stories about night shift. 1. The shadow in the hallway. A security guard working the night shift at an old office building in a quiet part of the city noticed something strange one evening. Every time he made his rounds, he would pass a long hallway where the lights flickered on and off. One night, while walking through the hallway, he heard footsteps echoing behind him. Turning around, he saw nothing but darkness. Confused, he kept walking, but the footsteps followed him, getting louder with each step. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end of the hall, tall, thin, and shadow-like, with no face. The guard froze, and the figure moved toward him, its footsteps silent. When it reached him, it whispered, "Leave now." The guard ran out of the building, and the next day, he found out that the office had been abandoned for years. 2. The radio that played by itself. A night shift janitor at a hospital was cleaning one of the empty wings late at night. As she pushed her mop down the hallway, she heard a faint static sound coming from one of the old radios in a nearby waiting room. She walked in to turn it off, but as soon as she reached for the knob, the radio stopped on its own. She thought nothing of it and continued her work, but as she moved further down the hall, she heard the sound again. She went back to the waiting room, but this time the radio wasn't just static, it was playing a message, "I'm still here." The janitor's heart raced. She checked every corner of the room, but there was no one there. She decided to leave, but as she turned to go, the radio came back on. The same message played, louder and clearer. That night, the janitor never returned to that wing. 3. The patient who wasn't supposed to be there. A nurse working the night shift at a small, quiet hospital had a routine of checking on all the patients every hour. One night, she entered a patient's room, a man who had been listed as deceased for the past few days. His chart was checked, and the nurse confirmed that the man had passed away. Yet, when she walked into the room, she saw him sitting up, wide-eyed, staring at the door. The nurse quickly backed away, thinking it was some sort of mistake, but the man's eyes followed her, his face a mask of terror. She went to check his chart again, but when she returned to the room, the bed was empty. No sign of the man. The nurse ran out to the desk to check again, but the patient's records were marked as deceased. When she asked the night staff about it, they simply said, "You're not the first to see him. He's never left." 4. The hospital's forgotten floor. A new nurse was assigned to work the night shift at a large, old hospital. The building was known for having some quirks, but nothing too strange. Until the nurse was asked to check on an elderly patient in a room on the hospital's 3rd floor. She had never heard of this floor before, so when she asked the staff, they simply told her it was closed off for maintenance. Confused but following orders, she made her way to the 3rd floor. As she opened the door, she was greeted by a long, cold hallway. The lights flickered as she walked, but the silence was unnerving. At the end of the hall, she found the patient's room. When she entered, the patient looked confused. "Why are you here? You shouldn't be here, it's not safe," they whispered. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. The lights went out, and she heard faint whispers coming from the corners of the room. She managed to escape, but when she returned to the front desk, the night shift supervisor informed her that the 3rd floor had been abandoned for years due to mysterious disappearances. 5. The mirror on the wall. A night shift security guard working in an old mansion-turned-museum noticed something strange in the grand hallway. One of the mirrors that hung on the wall reflected not just the room, but something else, a dark figure standing in the corner of the hallway. He turned around, but there was nothing there. This happened again and again, and no matter how many times he checked, the reflection in the mirror seemed to show someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Eventually, the guard couldn't take it anymore. He decided to face the figure in the mirror. He approached the mirror cautiously, but as he got closer, he noticed something chilling. The figure in the reflection was mimicking his every move, until it turned its head and grinned. Frozen in place, the guard was unable to look away as the figure slowly stepped out of the mirror and into the hallway. When morning came, the guard was never seen again. 6. The return of the forgotten worker. In a remote factory, the night shift workers were responsible for operating machinery and maintaining the equipment while the day crew rested. One night, a veteran worker, who had been at the factory for decades, noticed a new face among the crew. The young man appeared to be a temporary worker hired for the night shift, but something about him was unsettling. He never spoke, his movements were slow and deliberate, and he seemed to blend into the shadows. The veteran worker tried to ask him a few questions but received no response. Later that night, the worker went to check on the machine the young man was operating, only to find it running on its own, unmanned. Frantic, he searched the factory but couldn't find him anywhere. When the morning shift arrived, the worker mentioned the strange employee, but the foreman gave him a puzzled look. "There was no one working with you last night. The only person who worked here that late was John, but he passed away 5 years ago in an accident." 7. The night shift caller. A night shift receptionist at a small, 24-hour diner began receiving strange phone calls after midnight. The calls were always the same heavy breathing, followed by a low whisper saying, "I'm watching you." At first, she thought it was just a prank, but after the calls started coming every night, she grew more paranoid. One evening, she decided to try and trace the call. As the phone rang, she answered and immediately pressed the receiver against her ear, listening closely. To her horror, she heard the same whisper, but this time, it was followed by the sound of a door opening and footsteps getting closer. Terrified, she turned to look out the diner's front windows. There, standing in the dark, was a figure, slowly approaching the door, staring at her with hollow eyes. The phone line suddenly went dead, and when she went outside to confront the figure, there was no one there. The next morning, the diner's security footage showed no one near